He was 18 years old and he had one last thing to do before he left. She was 9. She stood at the front door of their house in a small American town in the autumn of 1942, holding the sleeve of his uniform jacket the way she used to hold his hand crossing the street. He bent down and looked her in the eye and told her he would write. He told her he would come back. She nodded very seriously and let go of his sleeve, and he walked down the front steps and did not look back, because looking back, he knew, would make it harder to leave. 16 million Americans left homes like that one. They left sisters, mothers, sweethearts, fathers too old or too young to go themselves. They left in a country of roughly 130 million people, which means that by the middle of the war, 1 in every 8 Americans had put on a uniform and gone somewhere over the horizon. The families who stayed behind, including the little sisters who made their brothers promise, would wait through years they had no map for. That waiting had a shape. It was not the shapeless anxiety of not knowing. It was something more structured, more daily, more demanding than that. It was the particular discipline of ordinary life, carried on under extraordinary pressure. You got up, you went to school, you did your part on the home front the way the radio and the posters told you to, collecting newspapers and tin cans and rubber, buying war stamps with your allowance, growing vegetables in the victory garden behind the house. You did these things because they were useful, and because they were something to do with your hands, while your hands wanted to be doing nothing but waiting. And then mail call came, and the world either held together or it didn't. Letters were the lifeline of the war, and the United States Postal Service carried that lifeline at a scale that is still staggering to consider. In 1945 alone, nearly 3 billion pieces of mail moved between American service members and the people waiting for them at home. The military introduced a system called V-mail, Victory Mail, in June 1942. Letters written on a standard form, photographed to microfilm, the film flown across the ocean, the letters printed on the other side at 1/4 size, and delivered. Over 1 billion V-mails were processed before the war ended. The average soldier in 1943 received 14 pieces of mail a week. 3/4 of the soldiers on New Guinea wrote home every single day. He wrote every week, as he had promised. The letters arrived crumpled, sometimes with lines blacked out by the censor's pen, any detail that might give away his position cut away before she could read it. She didn't mind. She read the rest until the paper went soft at the folds. She kept up them in a shoebox under her bed. He was somewhere in Europe. That was all she was supposed to know, and all she did know. He was somewhere in the machinery of a war that by the end would kill 407, 316 Americans in uniform, and wound 670,000 more. She did not know those numbers. She only knew his face and his voice. The letter said ordinary things, or things that sounded ordinary. He said the food was not as bad as people claimed, some days. He said he was making friends, good men from places he'd never heard of before the war, a kid from a farm in Iowa, a welder from Pittsburgh, a quiet man from New Mexico who never spoke much but was always the first one ready. He said he missed her cooking, which made her laugh because she was 9 years old and couldn't cook anything at all. He was teasing her, the way he always had. What the letters did not say was everything the censor would have removed in any case, and everything he chose not to say because he was protecting her. The noise, the cold that settled into the ground and stayed there, the faces he would carry for the rest of his life. He wrote around those things with the same care he used to write around his position and his unit, number, blacking them out in a different way. The families at home developed their own censorship. They learned not to read too much into a gap in the letters because a gap was sometimes just a gap. The mail stacking up somewhere, the crossing taking longer, a base move with no postal address yet. You trained yourself not to count days. You trained yourself to fold the shoebox closed and carry on. But you also learned to dread the sight of a Western Union messenger. In the years of the war, the telegram was the instrument of the worst possible news. Western Union operated offices in nearly every town in America. When a service member was killed in action, or wounded, or declared missing, a telegram went to the next of kin, a small envelope with a yellow form inside, and the kind of language that changed your life in a single sentence. People who lived through that time remembered decades later what it felt like to see a delivery car slow down on their street. You watched from the window to see which house it stopped at. In some towns, the sight of a taxi was enough, because the taxi company handled telegram deliveries and everyone knew it. If it stopped at your house, you opened the door already changed. She knew this. The girls at school had talked about it. One of their teachers had a Blue Star banner in her window, a son overseas, and when it came down one November morning and a Gold Star banner went up in its place, no one needed to ask why. The whole school understood without being told. The war required a great deal of 9-year-olds. It required that they understand things children should not have to understand yet. It required a kind of maturity that was not chosen, but simply arrived, carried in on the same tide that carried away the brothers and fathers and neighbors. American children in those years bought war bonds with their allowances, ran scrap drives, learned the meaning of rationing before they were old enough to understand economics. Some 180,000 American children lost their fathers before the war ended. Millions more waited, as she waited, for someone who had promised to come home. He kept writing through the autumn and the winter. He kept writing as the war ground west across Europe and the fronts moved, and the names of towns came and went on the radio. She learned to find those towns on the map in her classroom. Anzio, the Bulge, the Rhine, plotting the general direction of a war she was too young to fully comprehend, but old enough to feel in her chest. And then, one spring, the letters stopped, not for the worst reason. The messenger did not come. The weeks passed in silence, and she counted them and made herself stop counting. Their mother did not say anything that was not reassuring, and she recognized the reassurance as the same thing her brother did in the letters, the protective blank space, the thing that was not said. Then a letter came, postmarked from a military hospital in England. The handwriting was different, slightly, slower, like a man writing with his left hand who usually wrote with his right, or like a man writing from a position that made the paper hard to hold flat. He was all right, the letter said. He had been hurt. He was going to be fine. He was coming home. She put the letter in the shoebox with the others and sat on the floor next to her bed for a long time. He came home in the summer of 1945, after the war in Europe was over and the Pacific was winding down toward its end. He came back thinner and quieter than he had been, with a scar on his forearm that she noticed immediately and never asked about. He sat down at the kitchen table and she brought him a glass of water, and they sat there in the afternoon light without saying much, because there was too much to say, and neither of them knew where to start. She showed him the shoebox. He went through the letters one by one, reading his own words as a person outside himself, a young man who had written about food and weather, and a quiet man from New Mexico, who had very carefully not written about anything that mattered, and who had kept his promise. They did not call it resilience in those years. They did not have a public vocabulary for what the families on the home front had done and endured. They called it the home front and let it stand for everything. The Victory Gardens and the tin drives and the bond purchases and the gold star, banners and the shoeboxes under the beds of 9-year-old girls who had learned to fold the lid closed and carry on. 16 million Americans served. The number is so large it no longer sounds like people. But every one of them left someone behind who made them promise. And every promise was a kind of contract with a future that was not guaranteed, a reach across the ocean and the noise and the blank spaces in the letters toward a kitchen table and an afternoon and a glass of water and everything that couldn't be said. He sat there with his sister and the shoebox between them, and outside the window the summer went on without caring whether he had made it back, and it was beautiful anyway.